so that it will be good. You can understand who else is going to speak on Power 9 and other stuff. Thank you. And our next speaker is going to be from Vich Pilani, Professor Pratik Narayan, and he's going to be talking about enhancing computer vision in low visibility conditions using Power 9 systems. And Pratik Narayan is an assistant professor in the Department of CIIS at Vich Pilani, Rajasthan, India. His research focuses on building systems using artificial intelligence and machine learning for improving the existing technologies in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is one of the key areas right now, and also one of the future technologies too. So it's a great opportunity to listen to this. And is cybersecurity and computer vision and healthcare all good industries? And Pratik has previously held research positions with the National University of Singapore as a part of his postdoctoral research, and the New York University Abu Dhabi campus, UAE, where he carried out a portion of his PhD research. His PhD was funded by grants from the Ministry of Electronics and IT, Government of India. With this, I welcome Professor Pratik Narayan to go ahead and present.
Hello, Mr. Ganesh. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, there is a background noise. Probably, is it like a fan?
Yeah, is it better now?
The fan, probably. Yeah, it's there.
Okay, I have turned off the fan. Let me just hold it close to my mouth. Can you hear me well now?
I think it's not clear actually.
Yeah, some background noise.
So it's maybe due to your audio.
Okay, maybe my mic wasn't so good. Is it better now?
I mean, maybe you have to speak a little loud in that case.
Yeah, how does it sound now?
Better.
Better?
Better.
Okay, probably my wired microphone was giving issues, so I'm speaking without that in that case.
Yeah, that would be more appropriate, I guess.
Yeah, fine. So I just shared my screen. Please do acknowledge to me that you can
see. Yes, we can see your screen, and now you are having better audibility. Go ahead.
Okay, that's good. So I'll just begin now. The previous speakers have given excellent talks regarding the Power 9 systems and architectures, and what we'll be doing now is we'll be shifting gears a bit. I don't come from a hardware background. I come from a computing and applications background, and I will be talking about my work with these Power 9 systems in terms of the applications we have done in computer vision and deep learning. So let me just have very, very brief introductory slides, couple of them, so that everybody in the audience is in sync. I'm sure the audience here is like well knowledgeable in these areas, but just to have a continuity from the basic topics, what exactly is machine learning is what I'll start with, and just very, very quickly move on to the research aspects. So we often define machine learning as the science of getting computers to act without being programmed explicitly. Essentially, computer algorithms which will improve automatically through experience. In more technical terms, machine learning involves composition of non-linear transformation of data. When we're dealing with data which is not linearly separable, and we want to build models to separate such non-linear data. Essentially, the goal here is to learn useful representations from such non-linear data. Typically, we call these representations as features. That's the more crude language word used. We call them as features. And we want to create good features so that we can have a good transformation of data and separate the data. And machine learning can involve several goals. It can be supervised in nature, where all your data points are labeled. It can be unsupervised in nature, or it could be a reinforcement learning as well. So without really bothering about the details of all of these, we'll just simply move forward with a small example of what machine learning model or supervised model might look like, just as a prototype kind of example. You may have things like, just a second, variety of different things like text, documents, etc. you might use to train your model. You would use input data as text or documents or images, create feature vectors using that, and those feature vectors around and labels are used to create an algorithm, a machine learning model. And with this trained model, whenever you come across with new data, you can use the new data converted to a feature vector, and your trained model will be able to tell you, okay, what's the expected label over here. That's in a very, very simplistic way. I just given a background of what is machine learning. And further, what is computer vision? Computer vision essentially deals with visual data. We're talking about a machine's vision capabilities, and just learning feature representation is not enough for visual data. A visual data is much more than just taking raw data and creating some vectors out of it. This is because, as one famous researcher has put it, computational vision involves these classical R's: reconstruction, recognition, and reorganization. When you're looking at a picture, for example, wherever you're sitting right now, if you look around your room or you look around your window, you have a particular view of a scene. If you want to put that scene in, say, a painting, you would have to have certain amount of reconstruction involved to reproduce whatever you are seeing. And if, say, you want to describe that scene to somebody and your friend wants to understand what all is there, there's recognition involved. Maybe you're seeing your laptop right now, you're seeing your phone, or outside your window, you're seeing some cat moving around. There's recognition involved. And reorganization is also involved when you are taking inputs from various places and putting together in a single place, and you reorganize things to make an intelligent picture. So computer vision is a lot more than just, say, textual data or written data, because every image can be having a lot of things captured inside it. So broadly, it's this kind of hierarchy that the real world is composed of images, videos, scans, sensor data, and a lot of other things. That's the lowest level of hierarchy. From this real world, we want to create a model of the visual world where we are focused on getting certain feature encodings, certain descriptors, or certain interest points, so that we can capture the interesting information. For example, if a person is, say, playing a game of cricket, I want to understand from my model the interest points of his body movement or his bat movement, so that I can make a decision that the person is indeed playing cricket, something like that. And that's of course the upper step, the capturing the information. So after building a model of the visual world using certain encodings or descriptors, what we essentially want to do is we want to perform certain tasks to give us proper information of what we were seeing in the real world. So as I described, say the real world involves a game of cricket happening in front of you. You want to capture that model of the visual world by certain encodings and descriptors and filters, so that you can get the required information. And let's say you can perform action recognition, that there's a game of cricket being played, or you can perform object recognition to understand that where are the humans, where are the signboards, etc., or other tasks like video summarization. So this is a typical kind of hierarchy which computer vision kind of models follow today. Given a real world description, build a model of the visual world, and then get the required essential information out of it in the form of object recognition, semantic segmentation, video summarization, etc. What I wish to briefly talk about it, that what is the kind of computer vision achievements we have today, particularly using deep learning. Computer vision is not a very new field. It has been around for a long time, but the recent advances in deep learning have taken us a step further. For example, autonomous vehicles, driverless vehicles are finally becoming a reality. What you see on the top left is the view of inside a driverless car, the kind of dashboard which is available, where driverless car is automatically calculating in what lanes it should drive, how much distance it should maintain from other vehicles approaching it, and accordingly increase or decrease the speeds. Face recognition is also becoming increasingly popular, and in fact many startups are using it as a technology. The example which you see of face recognition is a Bangalore based startup which uses AI enabled drones and Aadhaar information to capture people's faces and identify them whether they can be identified using Aadhaar or not. Other popular applications using computer vision are like object detection. Healthcare has also seen a lot of boom, particularly in COVID times. We are seeing a healthcare industry utilizing technology like deep learning and computer vision more and more, such as the example in front of you where a COVID patient CT scan and non-COVID patient CT scan is being compared using a computer vision technique. In the context of autonomous vehicles, again, even driver surveillance techniques are available which can actively monitor whether the driver sitting in the car is feeling sleepy, whether he's active or not. In case the autonomous vehicle wants to shift control to the driver, is he ready to take over or not? All these technologies are already getting experimented and might very soon be in place. Another popular place where computer vision is being used is 3D reconstruction through input 2D images, given 2D maps captured through technologies like Google Maps, etc. 3D reconstruction of monuments or entire small cities can be done, which can be of significant value in urban planning. So I'm sure many of you are already acquainted with these technologies or already working on these technologies, and we'll not be spending time in talking about them actually. What we'll be spending time in talking about is certain kind of limitations which still exist in these technologies. Of course, by no means will I'm talking about the exhaustive kind of limitation. Limitations are there, research is in progress. For example, talking about driverless vehicles, security is a very important concern. Unless these are very secure to say internet-based hacking, it would be risky for an entire city to go autonomous. For that reason, many of the places autonomous driving is being tried out on an experimental basis. But yeah, we're not talking about security right now. We're talking about a very particular aspect related to computer vision. And for that, I'll just pose a small example to you over here that consider that you had to sit in an autonomous vehicle wherever, in whichever city you are. In some cities, I'm sure these test vehicles are already available. Others can just imagine it in their mind, and you happen to be using that autonomous vehicle in a very severe snowstorm or sandstorm or a dense fog or a pitch dark night without electricity. Now, unless you were very, very sure that the technology has advanced to that level, that there's no risk, I'm sure you would have a hesitation. And you might feel more comfortable driving it yourself, even if it's a dense fog or dark night, rather than sitting in a car operated by a deep learning algorithm. Why is that? Why most of us would feel more comfortable not using an automated car in such scenario? The reason is that most of these computer vision approaches, which I've just described to you in the previous slide, they are designed to work on imagery, whether still images or videos, which were captured in very clear, good lighting conditions, good sunlight, most likely outdoors or sometimes indoor with good lighting and good resolution. That's typically the way algorithms are designed. Some of you who are fans of deep learning techniques might have heard the names of YOLO, RCNN, Faster RCNN. They are designed to work on good images. In fact, most popular data sets, whether it be ImageNet, Poco, etc., they give you good images. And that's the reason they are good data sets. If they do not provide you good images of good resolution, they would not be called good data sets. However, the problem is that as soon as we talk about low visibility conditions, the performance of these techniques, which I had mentioned a couple of slides ago, the techniques like object detection, semantic segmentation, video summarization, and etc., the performance begins to deteriorate. They suffer a performance degradation, which is a risky thing. Sitting in your autonomous car in dense fog, you want to be very sure that the autonomous car is not going to bang you in the car in the front, right? And since conditions of low visibility are a frequent occurrence in real life, it is important to address this problem so that we can have better design systems of computer vision. So this happens to be my area of interest for research where I've been working for the past few years, and with the help of Mr. Ganeshan and the access we have to the Power9 systems, we have been able to get good results recently. So in specific terms, I'm introducing the topic to you, computer vision in low visibility. So first of all, computer vision in low visibility, is that a real problem? I'm sure most of you will agree that it is a real problem because every year, most likely in winters, we do hear of news articles talking about airlines having problems, aircrafts getting delayed, airlines facing shutdowns, airports being shut down, whether due to the fog or due to the pollution in the Indian capital like Delhi, or whether other problems like the example you see in front of you, smoke from wildfires. And of course, sometimes a city may face a blackout, a complete electricity blackout, and then also these things do happen that flights are not able to land on time on airports. So just a couple of examples which I've given over here to demonstrate that yes, vision in low visibility is a necessity for many applications, for many areas. And since more and more applications are relying on deep learning, are relying on computer vision, enhancing computer vision in low visibility is an interesting area, a very applicable area. So with that, what I will do is I'll just briefly switch gears, and I'll explain later to you why I switched gears, but for now I'll briefly switch gears and explain to you a very interesting concept involved in deep learning based models, what we call as generative models. I'm sure most of you who have had exposure to machine learning or deep learning have done some kind of classification or clustering or regression tasks. That is where most people start. But another very interesting models are generative models. Actually, machine learning, deep learning, computer vision models are already very good at creating classification algorithms. Classification algorithms mean detecting spam from not spam, detecting a cat from a dog, and things like that. Excellent models can be built using machine learning and deep learning in today's time. But the more interesting or the more tricky part is to develop models and algorithms which will actually analyze the loads and loads of data we have today and create more interesting data similar to the data I have. So in that regard, generative models are a very, very promising step. Just to illustrate what I'm trying to explain over here, that given training data of certain dimensions, for example, giving training data of several faces, can I create a model or can I learn the patterns from this data so that I can have a model where I can create more faces which look similar to the data distribution I have with me. So I have certain data distribution, the data distribution has many faces. Can I learn the patterns of my data so that I can create more faces which look similar to the data I have? Essentially, the examples which you see in front of you over here are artificial faces created by the generative model after learning the patterns from this data which I have with me. So essentially what we are creating is we are creating more synthetic data from the real data which we have. And this is a very useful technique because it can lead to creation of data which never existed and thus aid many applications, such as image-to-image translation problems. The image-to-image translation problem is one example over here, is that given lots and lots of black and white images, for example, say images which were clicked 20, 30, 40 years ago when color cameras were not commonplace or not advanced or didn't exist at all, given a lot of black and white images and certain color images as well, can I learn to transform black and white images to color images by proposing an objective function, a loss function, which learns with the help of the neural network and can accomplish the translation from input X to output Y. This is what we call as image to image translation. The most popular way this is accomplished is with the use of generative adversarial networks. They were introduced less than a decade ago in a paper by Ian Goodfellow et al. And since then they have become extremely popular. A lot of research work has happened using them. Generative adversarial networks, in contrast to typical neural networks which are just one network, it's about two networks being trained simultaneously. In fact, simultaneously in the sense that they are competing against each other. What does that mean? It's, if you are familiar with game theory, it's something like a game between two players. There's a generator, we have a generator G and we have a discriminator D. The generator model learns to capture the data distribution, and the discriminator model D estimates the probability that the sample which G is generating came from the distribution itself or it did not come from the distribution. So basically, in simple words, what G is trying to do, G is trying to generate natural looking face images, if we talk about the face data which I showed to you, whereas D is trying to decide whether the image is a fake image or the real image. And since they are competing against each other, trying to fool each other, they both improve over time until both of them become so good that the output from G is as good as the real output. Something like this. Given the training data from the Celeb A dataset, which is a popular open source, openly available dataset, we want to create excellent quality artificial face images, so much so that neither a neural network nor a human being will be able to understand that these images are fake or these images are real. And recent research, say a couple of years back, is able to pretty much accomplish this task. If we see the kind of timeline which has happened with the advent of GANs, initial GANs, as early as Goodfellow's original paper, created photographs which are having very poor quality and did not look realistic. They were not looking real. That's like around 8-9 years ago. But with the recent advancement, we can see images being created which are completely artificial. There is no human being which looks like this or this, but they resemble very realistic looking faces. And apart from creating such faces, this kind of research also has applications in doing labels to street scenes. Given certain labels in this format, I can train a GAN which can create an entire street scene, although such a street scene doesn't even exist. Similarly, given an aerial view of the input, generative models can create maps, and just by having the aerial view, you will be able to have the map as well. Certain other things are there which are involved: day to night translation or edges to photo kind of translation. So many interesting applications have been already proposed using generative models, and we bring to you one more. We bring to you the application in the domain of enhancing computer vision in low visibility with the use of generative models. So to put it in very simple terms in the beginning itself, what we are trying to do is that there is loads and loads of data of clear images available. You can freely download from the internet or use some maps, Google Maps, etc. You can get clear images. And you can also very easily get images which were captured in low visibility, either fog or night or snow, etc. The goal we had over here is, can we learn to generate clear images from the images captured in low visibility conditions? Now the tricky part over here is that the data need not be paired. In fact, capturing paired data in such scenarios is very difficult. To have the same image, say the scene you're seeing right now outside your window, to have that very same image available with rain, with fog, in dark, in bright sunlight, is very, very difficult. And generally research relies on synthetic data. That's also one way of doing it. But then we felt that why not build generative models which don't really need supervised learning, which don't really need paired data. And that's where the power of generative models comes into picture. So essentially we worked on two application domains, which are image dehazing and low light vision. So essentially, given hazy or foggy images in normal road context or aerial context, we have both works. Can I produce clear images which are haze and fog free? Which will be a very good application to aerial flying systems or drones, because they rely on computer vision techniques these days. And second application which we have worked on is that given a dark image which has low light, can I enhance the visibility of that image and give you an enhanced output? So this is the ground truth, basically the original image which was captured with full light, and this is the enhanced output which we were able to produce from our algorithm. And you can see that it pretty much looks like the original image, with of course some scope of improvement. That's in certain places the visibility is not perfectly clear, but apart from that the visibility achievement is good. Similarly, on the image dehazing which you see over here, that there are hazy images with haze varying to different degrees. The first one being a very low haze, the second and third being very high haze, and the fourth one being of moderate haze. And over the lower side you can see images reconstructed using our approaches, where we were able to remove the haze to different degrees. In certain techniques, in certain pictures, the output is not perfect. The image is not perfectly clear. But in certain other pictures, we have been able to achieve good haze removal. So of course, that's just the brief output I'm showing to help you understand what we are trying to do. Let's go step by step now and talk about what we are trying to do over here. So one way, of course, would have been trying to build direct models which take a hazy image and remove the haze, or take the low light image and remove the low light. Those kind of models have had some success already, but limited success. So what we decided to do was we adopted a different kind of approach, where we take an image of low visibility, whether haze or low light. We perform a hyperspectral translation on that image, and using the hyperspectral image obtained, we obtain the clean image using generative models, and then perform required post-processing to obtain the final output. So essentially we added an extra step, because that extra step was giving added value. What was the added value? I'm sure most of you have at least some familiarity with hyperspectral images. The idea here is that we want to extend the input image domain beyond RGB. RGB is basically 3 spectral values, but we want to go beyond that, and we want to incorporate the complete visual spectrum. And why we want to do that? Because going beyond the typical RGB kind of images will give you a lot better kind of insight into what is actually happening. So just to demonstrate that if you take different bands and see the visibility which different bands offer, you will see that you get a lot more information from different bands. So essentially the idea of hyperspectral images is that there are different spectral bands, and what we want to do is we want to utilize the entire visual spectrum, which will provide rich information content. So just a background, that since we understand that how we perceive an object or how good we can see an object depends on what wavelength it absorbs and what wavelength it reflects. Therefore, if we go beyond just RGB and consider different wavelengths, we will be able to see that in different wavelengths, different portions of the image would have better visibility. For example, if I talk about more wavelengths beyond 400, 450, you will see that at some places you have better visibility in lower wavelengths, while at other places you have better visibility in higher wavelengths. So essentially, to incorporate this aspect of obtaining better visibility from several spectral bands, we decided to go beyond RGB and incorporate hyperspectral imaging. So far so good. I'm sure it sounds interesting that okay, you incorporate hyperspectral imagery, but wait a second. Hyperspectral imagery is not so easy to obtain. So essentially you need special spectral cameras to capture hyperspectral bands. You can't use a smartphone to capture hyperspectral bands. But then it is true that hyperspectral images do consist of very rich information from visual bands. But we were faced with an important problem that most modern approaches for vision tasks like segmentation, classification will use RGB images. When you're using YOLO or faster RCNN, or you're trying to design your own algorithm, or a production company is trying to design something, they are not going to use hyperspectral images. The reason being it's expensive to obtain them. So essentially, if you design something which needs hyperspectral data, it's a recipe for disaster. But then here, I just said, hyperspectral images do have good information. So how do you utilize them? Can't we utilize hyperspectral images even without spectral cameras? Can't we incorporate hyperspectral imagery in some way that even though the technique still works on RGB, I'm able to benefit from hyperspectral? That was the interesting problem in front of us, that there is high acquisition cost involved with hyperspectral images, and there are practically no large-scale hyperspectral datasets available for varied domains. We approached this problem with the help of the power of generative models, transfer learning, and domain adaptation. All of these are techniques used with deep learning. And what we did was we built models to perform RGB to hyperspectral reconstruction using GANs, and along with unsupervised domain adaptation. So essentially, unsupervised domain adaptation means that you take up RGB images available to you, and you take up hyperspectral images available to you. You would have some hyperspectral data which is labeled in nature, and using that you build a model which can convert RGB images of another domain to HSI of that relevant domain. So essentially, if I say you have a domain 1 where you have a small data, it need not be very big, where you have RGB as well as HSI available to you. And you have domain 2, which might be very large or might be small, where you have only RGB available. You don't have HSI available, and you cannot possibly obtain HSI because, as we said before, it's very expensive to obtain HSI data everywhere. But using this domain, can I build a model, a generative model, which will translate to this domain and help me perform RGB to HSI reconstruction, even though there is no HSI data available for domain 2? That's the model which we build using generative adversarial networks and unsupervised domain adaptation. Furthermore, the issue was there that even after obtaining the HSI needs to be fine-tuned further, because the HSI and RGB have a distributional discrepancy. So that's a fancy word, I guess. What does that mean? Essentially, if you talk in simple terms, RGB is 3 bands, red, green and blue. HSI is a lot more bands. So given a small picture and the distribution of pixels, and you talk of any one pixel, RGB is going to be just 3 bands, whereas the same HSI is going to be a lot more bands, so the images are not going to look the way you want them to look. The original image can get lost or distorted, so it was important to perform a feature alignment so that the original RGB is reconstructed to the closest possible using the HSI. For that, we used certain deep neural networks. In particular, we used a residual network to obtain the relevant feature distribution from the RGB and HSI, which we call as the hyperspectral catalyst. So essentially, using unsupervised domain adaptation and by training a ResNet, we obtained what we call as a hyperspectral catalyst, which takes the hazy images and gives us the dehazed images. So those of you who are interested to know details of the architecture can have a look at this paper which was published in WACD early in the year. WACD is amongst the top ranked conferences in computer vision, where you can see that the proposed GAN architecture is summarized in 3 components. First is spanning the input hazy image to a 31 channel spanned RGB image. Essentially, we are converting the RGB to 31 channels over here and using the 31 channel RGB to perform the hyperspectral reconstruction in part B. So we had 31 bands in the hyperspectral image. Therefore, we do a spanning to 31 channel in the RGB and use that to perform the hyperspectral reconstruction. Once you have the hyperspectral reconstruction done, you use the hyperspectral image and the ResNet model and the hyperspectral, the catalyst which I described previously, to perform the dehazing part and obtain the dehazed output image. So just some sample images which we obtained from our algorithm. You have the hazy part over here and you have the clear counterpart over here. Similarly on the right side, you can see that in certain images our algorithm performed really well, giving you a very clear output, while in certain other images the output is not fully clear, some patches are still there. Similarly, you can see in these comparisons where our model called SkyGAN, how it fares with existing research in the published previously. Yeah, here's some more techniques. That was for the dehazing part. Complementary work over here was of low light image enhancement, where again we took a dark image, we did 31 channel stacking and we created the hyperspectral counterparts. We had the reconstructed HSI and then we used another GAN architecture to perform the low light vision enhancement. The basic idea over here was that although such GAN based techniques already exist, but essentially they do not perform very good in giving good visual results. So what we did was we performed a spectral profile optimization in the spectral profile we try to match our reconstructed output to the real output to the best possible manner by considering a Fourier transform over the images. And in that regard, we were able to achieve better quality reconstruction from the low light images. So you can see that the images in front of you have a variety of results. Some of them are quite decently well lit, they are not so dark, while others are decently dark, and the output, the right side is the output in both cases. You can see that the darkness has been very much removed and you have a more well lit image. So this approach was called SpecNet and was published early in the year in AAAI. And you can see how SpecNet fares in comparison with other images, that in a visual sense you can perceive that the images are more clear compared to many other approaches. So broadly, we proposed unsupervised domain adaptation approaches for RGB HSI conversion, and we had novel GAN frameworks which could consider the distributional discrepancy between RGB and HSI, and also consider the fact that there is going to be discrepancy alignment between the features of RGB and HSI. And this was one of the initial works which demonstrated that HSI images have a very good role in image enhancement and can be accomplished in unsupervised manner. HSI has been explored since a lot of time, but the unsupervised approaches were not very prominently present. And apart from that, we also proposed a large data set for hazy aerial images called HAI dataset. So broadly, the presentation over here was based on my own research published in the past 1 or 2 years, which we were able to perform on the Power9 systems, the remote access provided to us by Mr. Ganeshan. Essentially, if I have to speak in very simple terms, RGB data is 3 channel, HSI, which we had is 31 channel. Fitting that HSI data on small servers is a very difficult task. You need very powerful big servers so that you can scale up your approaches. and more so with hyperspectral images and deep learning algorithms, which are many layers. You need powerful systems which allow you to scale up those techniques, and in that regard, the Power9 systems really helped us scale up our approaches and get good results. So, yep, that's all. That's all I have with me. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and had some good learning experience. If there are some questions about this, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, please, Pratik, thank you for the wonderful presentation, and also thanks for sharing your insights on the computer vision, and very useful for many folks. And there are some questions on the chat window. Maybe
I'm having a look at them.
yeah, maybe you can offline answer them, because in interest of timing, we want to move forward to the
Of course, I can do that. I can
Yeah.
answer them offline as well.
yeah. Any questions from the panelists for Pratik? From the panelists, Luke, Satish, Professor Satish.